In a quiet suburban street, she vanished. No forced entry, no signs of struggle, but the clues were there if you knew how to look. Her husband claimed he knew nothing, but the investigation told a different story. Security footage, hidden messages, subtle manipulations, a life shattered, a town on edge, and a husband who knew too much. The truth is darker than anyone imagined. Murder Book 360 presents The Husband Who Knew Too Much.
The night was quiet. Too quiet. A single street lamp flickered over the driveway, casting jagged shadows across the perfectly manicured lawn. Inside the house, laughter had once filled the rooms. Soft, warm, familiar. But tonight there was nothing but the faint hum of a refrigerator and the slow, steady drip of water from a faucet left slightly open. He had always seemed ordinary, the kind of man neighbors described as reliable, kind, thoughtful. A husband who brought flowers without reason, who remembered anniversaries, who smiled easily. But the truth is often hidden behind the ordinary, and some truths are darker than anyone could imagine. It began with a text, a simple, mundane message sent at 9:47 p.m. It read, "Are you home yet?" No one knew that in the minutes that followed, everything would change. The house that had once felt safe would become a cage of secrets, and the man who everyone trusted, who everyone relied on, who everyone loved, he would hold the key to something no one could explain, something terrible. The camera pans slowly over the kitchen table, a cup of coffee, still warm, untouched. A pair of reading glasses folded neatly beside it. The silence is oppressive. There's a sense that the room itself is holding its breath, waiting for someone or something to break it. A door creaks in the distance. Footsteps echo, soft and deliberate across the polished wooden floor. Someone is moving through the house, methodical, controlled, but their presence is invisible. Outside, the street is empty. The neighbors are asleep. The world continues, oblivious. But inside this house, a story is unfolding that will shatter lives and leave questions that no one could have predicted. And at the center of it all, he sits alone. In the dim glow of a lamp, a man who knows more than he should. A man whose secrets might be more dangerous than the crime itself. We won't reveal everything yet, not tonight, because some truths, no matter how carefully buried, have a way of clawing their way to the surface, and when they do, they destroy everything in their path. A clock ticks, slowly, measured, each second a heartbeat, each heartbeat a reminder that someone is missing, that someone's life has been altered forever, and that someone, unseen, unspoken, is watching, waiting. The screen fades to black. A whisper of wind rattles the blinds, and we are left with a single, chilling thought. He knew too much.
The town remembered her as radiant. Her laugh, a soft melody that seemed to linger long after she'd spoken. She was the kind of person who left a mark on everyone she met, not through grandeur, but through small gestures, a smile, a moment of genuine attention. Her name was Emily Harrison, 34, a teacher at the local elementary school. Emily's life was ordinary in the best sense. She rose early, brewed her coffee just so, and walked the dog along the quiet streets each morning, greeting neighbors and waving at children waiting for the school bus. She was meticulous, kind, and the glue in her circle of friends and family. To outsiders, nothing about her life suggested that darkness would ever find her. But ordinary lives have a way of being penetrated by extraordinary secrets. Her marriage had begun like a storybook romance. She met him, Mark Harrison, in college. He was charming, dependable, a presence that made her feel safe. Within months, they were inseparable, planning a future together. Friends said they balanced each other perfectly, Emily's warmth and Mark's calm, calculated intelligence. Together, they built a home filled with small joys, a garden blooming with tulips, Sunday dinners for family, late-night conversations over cups of coffee. No one imagined that beneath the veneer of domestic bliss, the seeds of suspicion were already planted. Neighbors would later describe the couple as perfectly normal, the kind you'd wave to on your morning walk, exchange polite conversation, and never give a second thought. And yet, Small fissures existed, invisible to those outside the walls. A phone call left unanswered, a fleeting look of irritation, a conversation that didn't add up. Each moment, seemingly insignificant, was part of a larger puzzle that no one was aware of. On the night she disappeared, Emily had followed her usual routine. She walked the dog, watered her potted plants, returned to the house just as the sun was setting. She made a quick dinner, laughed at a joke Mark told, and went to check the mail one last time before settling in to read. No one saw the danger creeping closer. No one heard the silence stretching just beneath the laughter. Because danger isn't always loud. Sometimes it comes dressed in familiarity, in calm tones, in a voice you trust. Emily never made it to bed that night. The house that had once been a sanctuary transformed into a silent theater of questions. Friends called, her parents called, her phone went straight to voicemail. Minutes became hours, and hours became a night of sleepless worry. Mark Harrison, her husband, became the axis around which the investigation would pivot. Not immediately, not in the way television dramas depict suspicion, but subtly, insidiously. He knew things. He always had. The details he provided were precise, too precise. The timings he recounted were exact, almost rehearsed, and while his composure reassured some, it unsettled others. Law enforcement notes from that night, later revealed in court documents, describe him as cooperative, yet enigmatic, calm in a storm that no one else could weather. He knows something, one officer would later whisper. But what he knew, and what he revealed, became the central question. Was he the key to finding Emily, or the keeper of a secret no one was ready to uncover? Outside the home, the town gathered in small clusters, their whispers carried on the chill night air. Flyers appeared on lampposts, and social media feeds erupted with concern. Missing woman, last seen at home, husband cooperative. Those words were simple, clinical. They masked deeper unease, the feeling that someone who should have protected her may have known more than he let on. Every photograph of Emily taken over the years now carried a new weight. The smiles froze in time, innocence captured forever. Friends and family clung to them desperately, hoping for a return that never came. The life she had built, the ordinary, comforting life, was now fractured, a haunting reminder of how quickly normalcy could unravel. And yet, even as grief settled in, so did suspicion. Mark Harrison's every action, once taken for granted, was now scrutinized. A text he sent late at night, a detail in a conversation that didn't align, a glance that lingered too long. To the outside world, he was grieving, but to the investigators and to those who would eventually piece together the truth, he was something else entirely. A man who carried knowledge far too heavy for one person to bear alone. The night Emily vanished, the ordinary rhythms of life became a meticulous record of absence. Lights left on, doors unlocked, footsteps unheard. And in the shadows of a house that had seemed so safe, the first whispers of a secret began to stir. Secrets that would not stay buried. Secrets that would lead to questions no one could answer. Because in the end, it wasn't just about finding Emily. It was about discovering what someone close to her had known, and how much that knowledge had shaped the night she disappeared. The night had settled like a heavy blanket over the quiet suburban street. Houses slumbered under the glow of street lamps, their windows casting rectangles of light across trimmed lawns. Inside the Harrison home, the calm routine of daily life had been replaced by an unnerving stillness. Emily had gone to check the mail for the last time that evening. Her footsteps, soft against the pavement, were the only sounds outside the house. The dog, now tethered by the porch, pawed at the ground impatiently. When she returned, the door closed behind her with a familiar click. That sound would become the last ordinary noise she ever made. Minutes stretched. Mark Harrison moved through the house as he always did, methodical, careful. The way he recounted it later would make him seem composed, even heroic, but the truth was more complicated. Something shifted in those final hours, a presence that could not be named, a tension that hung heavy in the air. The first alarm came from the mundane,
A missing shoe near the back door, a window left slightly ajar, a note left on the counter. Ordinary items transformed into ominous signals. Friends would later say they didn't notice anything unusual, but investigators, trained to read the subtle language of the ordinary, saw it all immediately. The call to the police came at 10:32 p.m. Mark reported Emily missing. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "She went for a walk. She hasn't returned," he said. Officers would later describe a careful phrasing in his tone, a precision that seemed rehearsed, deliberate. There was no hysteria, no panic, only control. Detectives arrived within minutes, sweeping through the home, shining flashlights into corners, under tables, into closets. The house was intact, almost pristine. Nothing seemed disturbed, and yet the absence of Emily was absolute.
Outside, the world remained oblivious. Neighbors peered through blinds, puzzled by the sudden activity of flashing patrol lights. The street, so often mundane and predictable, had been transformed into a stage for tension and fear. Forensic teams documented every detail: footprints in the backyard, fingerprints on the kitchen counter. The dog's behavior, anxious and agitated, became another piece of the puzzle. Every clue, no matter how small, was collected with precision. And yet, one critical question remained. What had happened to Emily in the minutes no one had observed? Interviews began immediately. Friends, neighbors, co-workers. They described her last known actions with careful attention, piecing together a timeline that would become both lifeline and trap. Each recollection added depth to the night, revealing ordinary moments that now carried sinister weight. Mark's account remained consistent. He told officers he had been in the study, catching up on emails. He claimed he had not seen her leave the house after checking the mail. His story matched some details, small, innocuous confirmations, but fell short in others. Subtle inconsistencies would later become critical points of scrutiny. By midnight, the search extended beyond the house. Police combed the surrounding neighborhood, calling out her name into the night. Dogs trained to detect scents traced paths, sometimes leading nowhere, sometimes to a sudden, terrifying dead end. Every streetlight, every darkened alley became a potential clue or a trap. Then came the first chilling discovery: her purse, lying abandoned on a nearby bench. Inside, personal items meticulously organized: wallet, keys, phone. Nothing appeared stolen, nothing appeared forced, and yet Emily was gone. Detectives began to sense a pattern emerging, not of randomness, but of calculation. Whoever had taken her, or whatever had caused her disappearance, had done so with intent. The ordinary evening, once familiar, had become a carefully orchestrated puzzle, a series of events that no one outside the house could fully understand. Mark Harrison watched as the investigation unfolded. He spoke to officers, answered questions, provided details. Every word, every movement was recorded, and every action was a test. What did he know, and when would he reveal it? In the shadows of that night, the truth waited, invisible to the world outside, yet present in every small anomaly: the misplaced shoe, the slightly open window, the dog's anxious pacing. And the one person who could explain it all, the person closest to Emily, was the one everyone now looked at with a mix of hope and suspicion. By 3 a.m., the street was quiet again. Officers had left only a faint trail of tire tracks and flashlights cutting across lawns. Emily was still missing. The town slept fitfully, unaware that in one house a secret had been kept too long, and that the man who knew too much was now the focus of every question, every theory, every fear. Because sometimes the most dangerous person isn't a stranger lurking in the dark. Sometimes it's the one who sits beside you, who smiles at you, who knows things you'll never suspect until it's too late. And that night, in the Harrison house, danger was already inside. By the first light of dawn, the neighborhood had been transformed. Patrol cars lined the streets like sentinels. Crime scene tape fluttered in the chilly morning breeze, painting bright streaks of yellow across the manicured lawns. Residents stood behind it, their eyes wide with confusion, fear, and a curiosity that teetered dangerously close to accusation. Inside the Harrison home, the ordinary walls seemed to close in. Every drawer, every cabinet, every corner of the house was examined with clinical precision. Investigators documented fingerprints, collected fibers, photographed every surface. Even the most mundane items, the coffee mug on the counter, the folded reading glasses, became pieces of a larger, darker puzzle. And then, the first significant discovery: a set of footprints leading from the back door into the woods behind the house. They were faint, partially erased by overnight dew, but deliberate. The spacing, the direction, the depth, everything suggested urgency and careful planning. Whoever had taken Emily knew exactly where they were going. Mark Harrison stood silently in the study, arms folded, watching the flurry of activity. To the casual observer, he appeared calm, composed. To those trained to read the subtle cues of human behavior, he radiated tension. There was a tightness around his eyes, a stiffness in his posture, a silence that was louder than words. Detectives began questioning neighbors again, this time with renewed urgency. Some had seen lights in the woods the previous night. Others had heard nothing. Small discrepancies emerged, details that seemed trivial in isolation but became crucial under the magnifying lens of investigation. Back inside the house, another discovery compounded the tension: Emily's phone, hidden in a coat pocket on the floor of the garage. The screen was cracked, the battery nearly dead. Messages and call logs revealed a fragmented picture of the final hours: calls unanswered, texts sent and ignored. Some messages hinted at concern, subtle unease, while others were innocuous, mundane. Each one was now loaded with meaning. Forensic teams expanded their search to the surrounding woods. Canine units traced faint scents, leading them deeper into a thicket of trees where the underbrush was thick and the shadows long. Every snapping twig and rustle of leaves heightened the tension. The investigation had become a delicate dance between evidence and imagination, between what was seen and what was feared. Mark Harrison's statements remained consistent, but his calm began to waver under the persistent scrutiny. Small slips, micro-expressions, moments of hesitation, all were noted, recorded, and later analyzed. Investigators began to suspect that he held pieces of a puzzle he was unwilling to share. Pieces that might explain not only Emily's disappearance, but also the subtle threads of control and secrecy that had always surrounded him. By mid-morning, a forensic breakthrough occurred. A piece of jewelry, a bracelet Emily always wore, was found carefully placed near a tree, half buried in mud. Its position suggested deliberation, a signal or a marker. Investigators could not yet determine if it had been placed by Emily herself in a desperate attempt to leave a trace, or by someone else. The atmosphere in the house and surrounding area grew oppressive. Every knock at a door, every flash of a camera, every whisper among neighbors was imbued with suspicion. The ordinary had become extraordinary, routine had become threatening, and the man at the center of it all, Mark Harrison, became increasingly enigmatic. He cooperated, but on his own terms. He answered questions selectively. He offered timelines with precision, yet left gaps, silences pregnant with implication. Investigators began to wonder, was he protecting someone, or was he protecting himself? By evening, the story of the night had begun to emerge. Not fully, not clearly, but enough to draw patterns in the chaos. Footprints, discarded belongings, phone records, small inconsistencies. They formed a trail leading to one inescapable conclusion. Emily had not left voluntarily. She had been taken, and someone close to her knew more than they were saying. In the shadow of that realization, the investigation shifted from searching for Emily to searching for the truth. Every ordinary detail, an unlocked door, a misplaced cup, a muted conversation, was suddenly suspect. Every gesture of Mark Harrison, every controlled response became a potential clue. And in that tension, the story deepened, because the man who had once seemed ordinary, reliable, and kind now occupied a darker space, a space between knowledge and deceit, between love and fear, between innocence and guilt. The world outside continued, indifferent, but inside the Harrison house, the ordinary walls bore witness to a secret too heavy to remain hidden, a secret that, once revealed, would tear apart lives, challenge assumptions, and redefine everything anyone thought they knew about that quiet suburban street. Because sometimes the truth is not what is done, it is what is known, and who knows it. By the second week after Emily's disappearance, the town's fragile calm had collapsed. The story had seeped into every corner of the community, whispered in grocery stores, coffee shops, and school corridors. The ordinary streets were now haunted by speculation, and every passerby seemed to carry the weight of suspicion. Inside the Harrison home, the atmosphere had become almost unbearable. Investigators had returned multiple times, each visit uncovering details previously overlooked. Dust lifted, fingerprints matched, digital footprints traced. Every new finding was a puzzle piece pointing toward a single unnerving realization. Emily had not left willingly. The forensic team found traces of a struggle in the garage, a smear of blood nearly invisible against the concrete floor, subtle scuff marks, and a small scuff of fabric caught on the latch of the garage door. Nothing overt, nothing dramatic at first glance, but the evidence spoke volumes to trained eyes. Mark Harrison remained composed when asked about the discovery, but investigators noticed subtle signs: a flicker of tension in his jaw, a twitch in his hand, eyes darting to the corner of the room as if the truth would appear on its own. His statements remained precise, measured, and carefully constructed, yet the cracks were beginning to show. Detectives focused on his timeline that night. They reconstructed every movement, every interaction, every word. Security cameras from neighboring houses were scoured for anomalies. Calls and texts were cross-referenced. Tiny inconsistencies previously overlooked began to surface, small threads in a tapestry of secrecy. One of the most telling discoveries came from Emily's computer. A series of saved documents revealed her mounting unease over recent weeks. Notes about forgotten appointments, missed phone calls, fleeting arguments, subtle, almost imperceptible signs of tension she had tried to rationalize. The documents hinted at questions Emily had started asking, about safety, about trust, about things she felt she didn't fully understand. The investigators pieced together a sequence that would later define the night. Emily left the house to check the mail. She returned. She moved about the house in her usual routine. Somewhere between the kitchen and the garage, between the ordinary and the unseen, something changed. Neighbors' accounts began to provide supporting evidence. One remembered hearing a thud, soft but deliberate, around 10:15 p.m., just minutes before Mark called authorities. Another reported seeing a shadow move near the back door. These small fragments began to coalesce, forming a picture that was chilling in its clarity. The ordinary domestic space had become a theater for a calculated act, and someone inside knew more than they admitted. Even Mark's friends began to notice discrepancies. He spoke with a measured calm that, while reassuring to some, struck others as rehearsed. Questions about his whereabouts, what he had seen, and what he had heard that night were met with precise answers, answers that avoided emotion, avoided implication, avoided anything that might reveal the truth. By the third day of intensified forensic investigation, the evidence began to point decisively. Blood matched Emily's DNA, found in the garage and near the side door. Fabric fibers, consistent with the clothing she had been wearing, were discovered on the latch where the door had been manipulated. The dog's distressed behavior became a recorded pattern, corroborated by audio captured on a neighbor's security camera. The community, now fully aware that Emily's disappearance was not random, turned its scrutiny toward Mark Harrison. Suspicion shifted from possibility to probability. The man who had seemed perfectly reliable, the man who had been a pillar of his family, had become the focal point of the investigation. Inside the home, Mark's composure began to falter. Interviews grew longer, his responses tighter, and his eyes betrayed a depth of tension that no amount of rehearsed calm could fully mask. Investigators pressed for details he could not or would not provide, each pause and hesitation magnifying the sense of unease. By the end of the week, the investigation had transformed from a search for Emily to a psychological and forensic examination of Mark Harrison himself. Everything he did, everything he said, became part of the evidence. Every measured smile, every controlled gesture, every carefully chosen word was scrutinized under the lens of suspicion. Because in a case like this, the truth is rarely discovered in the overt. It is uncovered in the subtle, the small deviations, the quiet inconsistencies, the secrets that a person cannot fully hide no matter how much they try. And in the Harrison home, those secrets were now visible to anyone who knew how to look. Mark Harrison had become both witness and suspect, and the longer the investigation unfolded, it became clearer. The man who had always seemed ordinary, reliable, and protective was now the man who knew too much, and what he knew might be the key to unlocking the terrifying truth behind Emily's disappearance. The investigation had reached a fever pitch. Weeks of painstaking work had uncovered the fragments of a story, and now those fragments were forming a portrait that few could have anticipated. The Harrison home, once a haven of normalcy, had become a psychological battlefield. Every corner, every shadow, every object was a potential clue, a silent witness to the events of that night.
Mark Harrison was no longer merely cooperative, he was under scrutiny. The precision that had once seemed admirable now appeared calculated, almost defensive. Detectives began pressing harder, questioning his timeline, probing inconsistencies, and observing him under the lens of human behavior. Each question, each pause, each carefully measured response brought tension closer to the breaking point. It was in the small moments that the cracks began to appear. A hand trembling slightly while holding a coffee mug, eyes darting toward a corner as if anticipating the evidence to reveal itself, breaths held too long, a voice too measured, every action meticulously recorded, every silence amplified. Forensic breakthroughs accelerated the pressure. Blood and fabric fibers previously collected in the garage were now traced to specific points in the house, points that aligned with Mark's own account, but only partially. Investigators began reconstructing movements in minute detail, where Emily had been, where Mark had been, and where the story diverged from reality. Interviews with friends and family added another layer of complexity. They described Mark as attentive, calm, and rational, but also controlling in ways that had seemed harmless at the time. Subtle signs of tension in the marriage, minor disagreements, unexplained absences, they now became red flags, pieces of a psychological puzzle that suggested knowledge far beyond what Mark had admitted. Pressure mounted. Detectives approached him in the living room, their presence heavy, their questions pointed. "Mark," one said quietly, "we need to know exactly what happened that night. Every detail matters." Mark's composure wavered. A muscle twitched in his jaw. His gaze shifted toward the window, then back at the officers. For the first time, the armor of calm began to falter. His answers remained precise, but hesitation crept in, subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough for trained eyes to notice.
Outside the house, media attention began to swell. Cameras, reporters, and neighbors amplified the tension, turning a private nightmare into a public spectacle. Mark's every movement, every word was now scrutinized. In the glare of that attention, the psychological strain became palpable. Then came the confrontation that would define the trajectory of the case. Investigators presented the accumulated evidence, timelines, forensic data, footprints, fibers, phone records. The room seemed to shrink as the details converged on one undeniable fact. Someone close to Emily had knowledge critical to understanding her disappearance, and the evidence pointed toward the one person who had always been the center of her life, her husband. Mark's hands clenched. His voice, measured and controlled for weeks, wavered ever so slightly. Every officer in the room could sense the tension, the tightrope between revelation and denial. The man who had once seemed perfectly ordinary now stood at the edge of a precipice, balancing the weight of knowledge too heavy to carry alone. The breaking point was not violent. There was no dramatic confession shouted into a room of detectives. Instead, it was quiet, almost imperceptible, a subtle shift in posture, a long pause, a glance toward the floor that said more than words ever could. For the first time, it was clear that Mark Harrison knew more than he had revealed. Investigators left the room with a new understanding. The next moves would require precision, patience, and psychological insight. They were no longer simply searching for Emily. They were unraveling the carefully constructed narrative of a man who had orchestrated his appearance of innocence, who had known too much, and whose knowledge might finally be forced into the light. The house settled into an eerie silence after the confrontation. Shadows stretched across walls that had witnessed ordinary life, now transformed into the stage of suspicion, tension, and psychological warfare. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting long, distorted shapes across the neighborhood. The ordinary streets were forever changed, and the man at the center of it all was now both subject and suspect. The story that had begun with a quiet disappearance was now a psychological labyrinth, each piece of evidence a step closer to the terrifying truth. And in the Harrison home, the breaking point had been reached. Not with an explosion, but with the weight of knowledge, the tension of secrets, and the realization that the ordinary man next door was anything but ordinary. Because in true crime, sometimes the most dangerous moments are not those of overt violence, but of silent understanding. And Mark Harrison, the man who had always seemed to know what was best, now carried knowledge that could destroy everything. The courtroom was silent, save for the quiet shuffle of papers and the occasional cough from the gallery. Cameras lined the perimeter, capturing every nuance, every twitch, every glance. The air was thick with anticipation. Months of investigation, evidence, and suspicion now condensed into a theater of judgment. Mark Harrison entered the room, composed, suit pressed, hands steady. The man who had once seemed ordinary, reliable, and untouchable now walked under the scrutiny of an entire community, of law enforcement, and of a jury waiting to parse every detail. Every word, every gesture was under observation. The prosecution began with a meticulous recounting of the night Emily disappeared. They traced her last movements, the traces of blood and fabric in the garage, the footprints leading into the woods, the phone messages that hinted at a growing tension. Each piece of evidence laid bare painted a chilling portrait of calculation, deception, and secrecy. Witnesses took the stand. Friends described Emily's subtle unease in the weeks prior, small questions she had asked, fleeting expressions of worry. Neighbors recounted noises, shadows, and unexplained movements in the hours before she vanished. Forensic experts detailed the evidence collected: fibers, fingerprints, blood patterns, and traces of struggle. Every detail converged, pointing inexorably toward a single, terrifying truth. And then came the testimony that would fracture the room.
Former friends, family, and colleagues revealed patterns of control in Mark Harrison's behavior. Small at first, decisions about who Emily could see, what she could do, but escalating over time. A series of minor manipulations, barely noticeable, now recontextualized as part of a larger, darker mosaic. The defense attempted to maintain his composure. They argued for the ordinary, the routine, the possibility of misinterpretation. They highlighted his cooperation, his calm demeanor, his seeming attentive care. But the jury, trained to read the evidence and human behavior alike, could not ignore the contradictions, the omissions, the subtle yet damning inconsistencies. Then came the most damning revelations. Digital records of Emily's messages showed fear, questions, and subtle pleas for understanding. Security camera footage placed Mark near critical locations at key moments. Forensic analysis tied him to movements within the house that contradicted his initial statements. Every ordinary action, every familiar routine became a piece of incriminating evidence. Mark Harrison's gaze occasionally flicked to the gallery, his composure faltering under the weight of scrutiny. Small hesitations, subtle changes in tone, micro-expressions, all captured by the trained eyes of investigators, journalists, and the jury. The man who had once appeared perfectly under control was now revealed to be deeply human, fragile under the pressure of truth. And yet the most disturbing truths were not found in the overt evidence. They were discovered in the shadows of secrecy. Investigators revealed hidden communications, unexplained movements, and subtle manipulations of the narrative before authorities even arrived. It became clear that Mark Harrison had not only known too much, he had actively shaped the perception of events, controlling what others could see, what others could believe, and what the world would assume about the night Emily disappeared. The courtroom was a crucible. Every revelation amplified the tension. Every witness testimony, every piece of evidence, every silence and pause pushed Mark Harrison further into the spotlight. The ordinary man next door was gone, replaced by a figure defined by knowledge, control, and secrets that could destroy lives. By the final days of the trial, the jury had begun to understand the full scope. This was not a simple disappearance. It was a web of calculation, secrecy, and psychological manipulation. And at the center of it was a man who had always seemed to know more than he should, whose ordinary exterior masked extraordinary deception. When the verdict finally came, it was not merely a legal judgment, it was a revelation. The man who had been trusted, loved, and seen as ordinary had hidden truths capable of unraveling an entire life. Emily's absence was no longer a mystery alone. It was a testament to the danger of knowledge, control, and secrets kept too long. And as Mark Harrison was led from the courtroom, his expression inscrutable yet subtly fractured, the world outside began to grapple with a chilling reality. Some of the darkest crimes are not committed by strangers, but by those who know us best. Those who sit beside us, who smile, who seem ordinary, but who carry knowledge too heavy for anyone to bear without consequence. The trial revealed what the night had hidden. It exposed what the investigation had only suggested, and it showed with terrifying clarity that in the shadowed corners of ordinary life, secrets can be deadly, and the ones who know them best are often the most dangerous. The courthouse emptied, but the story did not. The streets outside the Harrison home, once quiet and ordinary, now carried a weight that could never be lifted. Neighbors whispered.
Journalists lingered, and the air itself seemed heavy with the memory of what had occurred. Life had returned in form, but the shadow of that night and the revelations of the trial remained. Emily's family, though devastated, began the painstaking process of rebuilding. They faced a world transformed, one in which the woman they loved had vanished, the truth had been distorted, and justice had finally arrived, but at a cost that could not be measured in legal terms. Their grief was quiet, punctuated by memories, photographs, and the echo of questions that would never be fully answered. Mark Harrison's life, by contrast, was irreparably fractured. The man who had once seemed reliable, protective, ordinary, had been exposed as someone whose knowledge and manipulation had obscured the truth for weeks. The trial had stripped away the veneer of composure and revealed the calculated, meticulous behaviors that had governed his life and, tragically, contributed to Emily's disappearance. Media coverage intensified. Documentaries, news segments, podcasts, each retelling dissected his demeanor, his actions, his psychology. To some, he became a symbol of caution, the danger of secrets kept too long, of knowledge wielded as power. To others, he was a chilling reminder that evil can hide in plain sight, beneath the mundane routines of suburban life. The neighborhood itself changed. Streets that had once been predictable and safe now felt haunted. Mailboxes remained empty at night. Dogs were walked in pairs. Lights stayed on longer, and neighbors locked doors that had once been left ajar. Ordinary life had been altered, shaped by fear and awareness of how quickly it could unravel. Psychologists and criminal behavior experts dissected Mark Harrison's motives, behavior, and the subtle patterns of manipulation he had employed. They spoke of control, deception, and the gradual escalation of psychological dominance. His actions, once overlooked as ordinary quirks, were now viewed as signs of a mind capable of concealing extraordinary darkness. Emily's memory became a rallying point. Friends established scholarships, memorial gardens, and community events in her honor. Her story, though tragic, inspired vigilance, empathy, and awareness, a reminder that behind ordinary lives, extraordinary truths may lie hidden. Yet even as the community sought healing, questions lingered. How much did Mark Harrison truly know? Were there details that might never come to light? Could the ordinary man anyone trusted be capable of such carefully concealed deception? These questions, unanswered, loomed like shadows in the collective consciousness of the town. For law enforcement, the case became a study in human behavior, evidence, and patience. The meticulous work, footprints, fibers, blood, subtle inconsistencies in timelines had exposed the truth, but it also revealed the fragility of ordinary assumptions. Every officer involved reflected on the balance between routine investigation and the psychological complexity of human deceit. And for the audience, the story lingered far beyond the courtroom. It was a narrative of ordinary life intersecting with extraordinary knowledge, of trust betrayed, secrets kept, and the thin line between the life you see and the life that exists behind closed doors. Emily's story became a testament that sometimes danger is not in the stranger in the shadows, but in the person who knows too much, who sits beside you, who smiles at you, and seems ordinary in every way, but harbors truths capable of shattering everything. The aftermath was quiet, reflective, and painful. It was the echo of a life interrupted, a love betrayed, and a community forever changed. The Harrison home, once ordinary, now stood as a silent witness to a story of knowledge, control, and the darkness that can exist behind the most familiar faces. Because, in the end, true crime is not just about what is done, it is about what is known, who knows it, and how long they can keep it hidden before the truth comes to light. And, in the shadow of that truth, the ordinary world is never quite the same. As the screen fades to black, a voice breaks the silence. In the shadows of ordinary life, secrets can fester, unnoticed and unchecked. Some truths are hidden not by strangers, but by those we trust the most, the ones who sit beside us, smile at us, and seem ordinary in every way, but harbor truths capable of shattering everything. Mark Harrison's story is a reminder. Knowledge can be dangerous, silence can be deadly, and appearances can deceive. Emily's life was stolen, her absence felt, and the echoes of that night continue to haunt a community that once believed they were safe. The question remains for all of us: how well do we really know the people closest to us? Because, in true crime, the most chilling stories are the ones that begin at home.
If you want to uncover more stories like this, dive deeper into the shadows, and explore the minds behind the crimes, subscribe, turn on notifications, and follow Murder Book 360 for your next journey into the darkness.